Greetings, I'm Will Rivinus, and with a show of my models that I have built over the years, this particular show is Vive La France. The earlier ones were cathedrals, churches, and temples, Americana, Hail Britannia for our late Queen, and now Vive La France in honor of Annie Denny, my eldest granddaughter, who is this year 23, 24, studying in Paris. And so I hope that these models will bring back happy memories for you and places that you have been and seen in time past. It will run about 20 minutes, and I hope you enjoy every one of them. We start with the most famous building in the world, or probably the most famous, because it made national news in 2015 with a disastrous roof fire. The actual building was built over the 12th and 13th centuries, and then in the 19th century, the central spire over the crossing was added by Viollet-le-Duc, the architect. And so now one of the questions is, should the 19th century spire be added back to the building, or should it be more purely 12th and 13th century as it has been for so long? I was so intrigued with the building that I have at various times built it in other models. But the main one that you've looked at is National Geographic, and it is superb and a lovely way to learn about the building. This is Sainte-Chapelle, an absolute jewel of a little building in the center of Paris with gorgeous stained glass windows, built in around 1240 for King Louis as his private chapel. It is absolutely gorgeous. You may consider that this model is rather small. This is part of a French tradition and a European tradition that starts with a postcard. And there is the same model as I started it. But it is actually a postcard sent by friends who visit. And you will find that there are a number of these models that are based on original postcards. This is the famous Chartres Cathedral that I've had the pleasure of visiting 2 or 3 times. It is one of the most magnificent of the French cathedrals, as you can see. And I will say that my first visit was in 1947, right after the war, and I got the opportunity to go up on the roof and then into the tower to see the magnificent bells that are in there. The building was erected in the 12th century on into the 13th century. It is one of the most fabulous buildings in all of France, and truly one of the most beautiful to work on, even though building a model does take most of a winter. And this is probably one of the uglier buildings in the collection. This is the Palace of the Popes in Avignon, south of France. In 1350, it was built to satisfy the needs of the third Pope. At that awesome time, there was one Pope in Rome, one Pope in Constantinople, and yet another one in Avignon. The church was supposedly administered from here, but perhaps the most interesting thing in town is the Pont d'Avignon, the bridge at d'Avignon, which is about 2 blocks away. At this point, we come to the year 1500. That in itself is not important, but generally speaking, there was a huge change in the history of France and Europe. We may recall that the First Crusade was called just a few years earlier, and that the 100 Years' War began. And strangely, the whole tenor of life changed from religious and the beautiful churches we have been looking at to the chateaus. And so after 1500, no churches. Before 1500, no chateaus. So this is a marvelous example, probably of the most complicated chateau in France. Again, it is a postcard that, when folded and glued together, renders the actual castle, the chateau. This is fascinating to do. I have been holding off because it's a mere 300 pieces to assemble if I do the real thing. But at least I have the starter with the little model of Chambord. Chambord was privately owned until 1933, when it became a state property. And it still has a huge set of grounds. The wall around the grounds stretches for 20 miles and is, of course, perfectly beautiful and marvelously maintained. But this is an example of how the structure of society changed from church to state around 1500. This building is dated technically 1519. The Chateau of Clemenceau was dated to 1516. All these dates sound official, but it obviously took 50 to 100 years to build. What is intriguing about this chateau is that it stretches across a small river, and the river flows happily underneath the chateau itself. I showed the catalog with it to give an eye for the gardens, which are typically well-organized, very structured French gardens, as opposed to the English gardens, which are more random and unstructured. Here we have a more traditional building, a Renaissance building without quite as much flourish as we've been looking at. This is Aisé le Rideau, which translates roughly curtain of water. From the model, we can't see that dimension of the building, but it's a charming place anyway. I wish I had had a chance to see it. Everyone who goes to Paris goes to the Louvre at some point. So here is the postcard version of the Louvre, which was started in 1516, but obviously has been added to any number of times. I've thrown in a postcard from Poland just to show how complex the postcards can get. You're supposed to cut all those out, fold them over, and glue them together. I haven't quite gotten to that yet. Somewhat more modest construction, it is the home of Claude Monet, which was started in 1840 and modified many times by him. He began painting in Paris, but ultimately moved away to his own private property, where he grew fabulous water gardens and water lilies. And you can see the garden on the right, and then a picture from any of a number of Monet paintings on the left. And he became truly famous for his impressionist open air outside painting. I found this model of a bark, B-A-R-K, or B-A-R-Q-U-E in French, in a gas station in the middle of France. There's no identification of what ship it is or where it sailed or what, but I was intrigued with the idea of building a ship model. So here you have a French bark. It was challenging but fun to build and remember the wonderful day that we found it. Oh, you're saying this is an American piece of artwork, but it was designed by Auguste Bertoli in France as a sculpture, and then the structure, the building of the inside of it in steel was done by Auguste Eiffel, who did the Eiffel Tower. The French gave it to the people of America in 1876 to celebrate our centennial, and when it arrived in 250 boxes, the people of New York reacted normally. What is it? Where did we put it? What's it for? And who's going to pay for it? So it took another 10 years to actually assemble the parts, claim the island, build the basic structure from underneath, and erect Lady Liberty, which is now a symbol to the rest of the world of the magnificence of America and the friendship of France.